Cindy Benavides, Chief Executive Officer of League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. Cindy, bienvenida. Arturo Vargas, Chief Executive Officer of NALEO Educational Fund. Mary Jordea, Secretary of State, Rhode Island. Clarissa Martinez de Castro, Deputy Vice President of Unidos. Unidos US or Unidos Us? US. US. There you go. Usa tu poder. Well, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And thanks for your patience. You all look amazing. I think we're all color coordinated just about, right? Even you, Max, Arturo.
Hey.
You guys email each other or something, or text each other.
Era buen gusto.
Yeah?
Era buen gusto.
Era buen gusto. Exactamente, buen gusto. So let me start off with this one. We just finished listening to these organizations, these local organizations, to see how they're mobilizing their grassroots movements in their communities. So let's see what we're doing nationwide. What does the 2020 electoral landscape look like for Latinos at the moment, a year and a half from the election, from your perspective, from the perspective of each one of you? And Arturo, I'm going to start with you first because you raised your eyebrows when I asked that.
2020 is the perfect storm. We have the 2020 census, we have primaries that will happen concurrently, that will be competing for the attention of the American public and competing for the attention of our community. And then we have the presidential election, which, and I'm not engaging in hyperbole, will be the most important presidential election in our lifetime. And where Latinos will play a decisive role. So all of that with understanding that Latinos at the same time are in the crosshairs of a number of political agenda to keep us from either being counted or from participating in the elections. So we're going to have, I think, the most challenging period in our history of civic engagement for the Latino community, but an opportunity to demonstrate that our institutions are ready for this challenge and we're not going to take it lying down.
Thank you very much, Cindy.
2020 will be historical. And I know we always hear every single presidential election, it will be historical. But here is why. In 2020, for the very first time, Latinos will be the highest minority electorate in the US. Por primera vez, in 2020, composing of 13.3% of all the electorate. And I have to agree with Arturo. At a time when we see war happening against Muslims, against the immigrant community, against Latinos, against our LGBT community, we have to be super vigilant and we have to make sure that we're thinking 10 steps ahead. My thought is here that as you're thinking of your action, when we look at 2020, every single person in this room has to make sure that their kitchen, their living room, the trunk of their car becomes their war room. Because it will take every single person to make sure that we are actually turning out to vote. It's not enough to register to vote now. We actually have to show up to the polls.
Right. Yeah, when we talk about 32 million Latino voters, it's potential voters. We've got to make sure that those 32 million, at least 30 million of them go out and vote. Nelly, please.
Yeah, so I'll give the example of Rhode Island, which is not one of the states that people talk about a lot, but to give you a sense of how far-reaching the impact of the Latino community is. So in Rhode Island, we actually have about 14% of our population is Hispanic overall in the state. 9% of Rhode Island's eligible voters are Hispanic. What that means is whoever wins, not just at the presidential level, but at the state level, all those constitutional officers, at the local level, when you have significant numbers of Latinos, you can't win unless you have that Latino vote. Particularly when you have very hard sort of pushes between groups. And so in Rhode Island, what we've seen as the Latino community, we're going to see it in 2020, is that they are the ones who are kind of the bellwethers of what happens in terms of who wins the races. 46% of Hispanics in Rhode Island are eligible to vote. We have 21 Latinos elected to office in Rhode Island, which I know people are like, wow, are there even Latinos here? But we have already 21 elected, and over half of those are actually Latinas. So we are a poster child. We're 6 different countries of origin within that 21. So you see the beginnings of that, and those are important bellwethers because they are able to speak to the community in a way that helps bring out the vote. In my case as Secretary of State, I have organized a lot of information in a very simple, easy way, educational format so that we move from just focusing on voter registration to voter engagement. People are not going to engage if they don't really understand what's going on. And we need to be able to, and as philanthropists and as donors and as civic organizations, there's absolutely a role, a nonpartisan role, to explain the system in a way that people feel that it's theirs.
Clarissa.
I'll build on what folks have said already. The reality is that the Latino community is coming of age, both figuratively and literally. 1 of every 4 children in the United States is Latino. We have nearly 1 million Latino citizens turning 18 between now and 2028 every single year. And we have about another 13 million Latinos who are in need of registration. And we have the tools and the knowledge to do it. We have produced proof of concept in how to engage successfully our community and do programs that are for, with, and by the Latino community. And what we need is partnership to sustain those programs on a continuous basis, because we have to build not just for 2020, which is a defining chapter in the future of the Latino community in this country, but for the country as a whole. But we also have to look at that as building for the future. The reality is that it's not just about resistance, which we must do, but it's about building that future for our children, on which we are seeing an assault right now. If you're a Latino in the United States right now, you feel like a protagonist in the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan. I mean, you are taking fire every single day. And even though the attack and that assault didn't start in the last 2 years, it has certainly aggravated and accelerated with a viciousness we haven't seen in quite some time. And this administration started going after the most vulnerable among us, the undocumented Latino immigrants. Then went on after documented immigrants, going after DACA recipients, TPS recipients, for example. The target is our children and handicapping us for generations to come. Just with immigration policies, we're putting at risk the future of 6 million US citizen kids. So voting is a lever at our disposal. It's certainly not the means to an end, because the end is transformational change for our communities and for the country. And I am really hopeful and inspired, as you have been in many panels when you got to hear from many of the organizations here and others with whom Unidos US has partnered to really increase the on-ramps to participation in voting and policy debates and in programs for our Latino community. And we have run those programs successfully. What we need is to increase their magnitude, and in a room assembling philanthropy from around the country, I know that when there's a will, there is indeed a way.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. I think you brought up some very, very important points. And some people think, well, undocumented immigrants shouldn't be here. Even legal immigrants, even other Latinos say they shouldn't be here. And that these attacks are directed at people who are breaking the law. We all know that it's not a crime to cross the border, but aside from that, all the Latino community is being affected by, in one way or another, whether you're here legally or not. You might have someone in your family member who might be undocumented, or now with this assault on housing for those who are here legally, but if they happen to have someone in their home that is not, then they would lose those rights. So, what do we do so that we don't feel like foreigners in our own country? I mean, this is our country. We are Americans too. What do we do sort of like to turn that antagonism on its head and activate our voices and make sure that we end the situation and it doesn't happen again? Anybody have any solution?
To me, it's civic. No, there's no silver bullets. I wish. but it's civic education, civic engagement. And we can't be afraid of it. For so long, philanthropy has been like, ooh, like we can't get involved in that because it's like government or it's partisan or whatever. Like, no, I mean, there are ways to do this still in a nonpartisan way that speaks to civic education, that allows the people who you're investing in, the communities, to make their own choices. But they have to be spoken to, they have to be given the tools in a way that's accessible. There's no reason why government forms and government websites have to be unfriendly and inscrutable. Every time you see a government form that's like that, it's basically saying you don't belong. If you don't understand this, why are you starting a business? If you don't understand this, why are you voting? And so there's a communication within how we do things that is already sending even subliminal messages every day on you don't belong here. No, we have to get our own Latino and other allies in government to change these things and to invest in things like civic education, which gives people the understanding that the government is here to work for them. It's here to work for us, not them.
I would add, Maria Elena, that we have to show up when we don't know the outcome. We have to remember that we as a people choose to be governed by this government and that we have the power. We have to reclaim our space and own our power. Part of that power is our own voices. How many of you have shared your story, not only on social media, but with others? I can tell you, as someone that came to the US undocumented, I am the American dream, right? Only in this country can you have someone that is undocumented who has picked up cans in the street of San Pedro, Los Angeles, now lead the largest and oldest civil rights organization in the country and the most powerful. And I say that because all of us, every single person in this room, has a unique story to share. And I would just add a part B. We have to become historians. We forget that America is a nation of immigrants. And we have to remember when we look at the names of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Colorado, these are names that are Spaniard, that are Spanish derived. And so we ourselves collectively have to make sure we are educated, know our history, and are sharing those stories.
You know, Maria Elena, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this point, why we do the work that we do. And I think one of the things we need to do is to affirm and to claim the principles and the values and the symbols of this country for what they are. They're ours. It's our flag. It's our Constitution. Mm-hmm. And we have to stand up and defend it as much as anybody else against those who are taking an oath to defend the Constitution, yet trample on it. We have to be the ones to stand up and do that. And in the course of my career, and I've been doing this now 30 years, you know, it's become so personal. You know, I have uncles and cousins who went to war in Korea and World War II and Afghanistan, Vietnam to defend the Constitution. I have 3 nephews who are in the Army Reserves, and they will march into war right now if the commander-in-chief tells them to, because they'll defend the Constitution. My husband's a federal judge. He walks into his courtroom every day to administer justice by the authority granted to him by the Constitution. My mother became a naturalized citizen and swore an oath to defend the Constitution. It is our Constitution, and we have to start acting like we're the defenders of it against others who are going to trample on it.
And it's just not right. And it's just not fair. I know that it's very difficult because it seems like the line that divides us from them is getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And if there's any time when we can erase that,
we have to be bigger than them.
If we have
to be bigger than them. We have to be the leadership. We have to be who we are. We're the future of this nation. Our children are the future of this nation. We need to prepare them to be the leaders that they're going to be of the globe. That's our responsibility. There are people who are trying to erase our progress and slow it down because they know what's the inevitable.
Yeah, we're allowing that to happen. That is what's unfortunate.
Well, I'm not.
So one of the interesting
Some of the
things.
perceptions that I get from people is like, even if they're born in the U.S., even if they're legal residents, even if they're naturalized citizens, they feel like they're foreigners, and this is our country. And what I was going to say is that during election time, I mean, you can erase all that us and them thing because we're just as American as anyone else. If we're born here, we're just as American as anyone else. If we're naturalized citizens, we're just as American or more American than Melania. You know?
Well,
Like,
one important thing to also keep in mind is that there is a reason why politicians the world over, and as ancient back as you may want to think, have used the politics of divide and conquer. It's because we as human beings fall for them all the time. And so what we're seeing right now is the issue of immigration is being used as a proxy to stir anxiety about the growth of the Latino community in the United States.
Yeah.
8 out of 10 Latinos in this country are United States citizens. But the effort to paint us all as outsiders is an effort to take away our power, to take away our voice, and to pass laws every single day affecting education systems, healthcare systems, economic advancement that are gonna make our coming of age fully, politically, and socially slower. That's what that's about. And they're starting again with the most vulnerable among us, which is why the issue of immigration, even though 8 out of 10 Latinos are US citizens, is so dear and close to our hearts. But here's the thing. I also am hopeful because Latinos are an optimistic and resilient community. I'm also hopeful because the American public, even in this environment of divide and conquer and scorched earth tactics of division, believes to this day that diversity is one of our greatest national assets. And Latinos are a perfect standard bearer of that. For anyone who cares about access to housing, about quality education, about healthy communities, and yes, about humane immigration policies and stopping mass incarceration, the growth of the Latino electorate is welcome news because these are the things that our community cares about. We need the investments to make sure that that voice and those priorities make it all the way, not only en las calles, pero en el Congreso, state and federal, y en las casillas.
I want to move on to another issue, which is a very important issue this year. It's the census, or next year, it's the census. What is your approach, Arturo, because we know that Nalea has been very, very, very involved in the census and mobilizing.
I am inmenso del censo.
Yeah. Eso no es gigante, there you go. What is your approach and how can you be sure Latinos will be counted in 2020? Not just making sure that the government counts them, but to make sure that they themselves be counted. And I'll tell you why I'm worried. I've seen quite a bit of people go out and say, no voy a contestar eso. I'm not going to answer why, because they want to boycott. They think they're going to punish the government for the way they're treated, so I'm not going to be counted, I'm not going to answer. What is the risk of that happening? How can we prevent that from happening?
Two things to keep in mind. Number one, since the inception of a Hispanic origin question in the 1980 census, forces have been mobilized to suppress the count of Latinos. In the 1980 census, in the 1990 census, in the 2000 census, in the 2010 census, and now in the 2020 census. We cannot look at what's happening today as an isolated example of what's happening. Number two, I think there is a concerted effort, as Clarissa alluded to not just diminish the influence of Latinos, but actually to diminish our numbers in this country because of the impact that we're having. And what greater way to make Latinos disappear than just not to count them, to scare them away from being counted. And that's exactly the agenda that we're seeing unfolding. We're also learning there's partisan agendas, that by including a citizenship question, this will facilitate the drawing of partisan lines for the benefit of one political party at the direct detriment of Latino voters.
And that's not a perception anymore. Just
That's
for
not a- that's
those who
fact.
have not read about
is fact.
one of the GOP strategists who helped shape the idea or create the idea of the citizenship question. It is now proven that his intention was to benefit the Republican Party, or more so, the white Republican
Non-Hispanic
Party.
whites.
The non-Hispanic.
Non-Hispanic white voters. You could easily draw more Republican non-Hispanic voting districts if you collect citizenship data at the block level to the detriment, again, of Latino voters. And look, folks,
Will the fact that this
Well,
information
just-
cannot
just-
make a difference, Arturo?
what's that?
Will the fact that this information cannot make a difference in the outcome?
Well, the fact that the,
Of the effort, of the, you know, the effort to make this, to politicize the census,
well,
the citizenship.
it's designed to suppress the kind of Latinos, I'll say. But I just want to make the point that if our vote didn't matter, if our numbers didn't matter, if we did not have any kind of influence in this country, we wouldn't see any of this happening. You know, this is a backlash against our own effectiveness. And we have to own that. We have to own the fact that we have made a difference, and we're going to continue going forward and continuing this progress. And we have to overcome these efforts to either turn the clock back on our progress or to try to slow it down. And we cannot let that happen because there is too much work we need to do to get this country back on the right track.
Nelly, of course, Rhode Island is fascinating in its rich cultural and ethnic mix. How people are counted there is also going to be absolutely critical during the census in 2020. How are you preparing for that, and what's your strategy?
Yeah, so in Rhode Island, actually,
14%.
yeah, 14% is the number at this time. In Rhode Island, actually, Rhode Island has 2 congressional districts. We have 1 million people. It owes that 2nd congressional district over the last 2 census to the growth and counting of the Latino community. So the counting of Latinos in Rhode Island is not a Latino-only issue. It's a community-wide issue. And I think that gives us a little bit of hope in terms of you've got the Community Foundation in Rhode Island sinking more money than even the state government is sinking in to ensure that everybody is counted. We have a lot of hard-to-count populations because of the way that our communities are structured architecturally. The triple-decker, which I guess isn't something that people know about all over the place, but they're basically apartment buildings with 3 houses, one on top of the other, 3 of them. And if the doorbell at the front is busted, you don't get to count anybody in the whole building. Yeah. So a lot of our communities live in this factory house, what was originally factory housing. So we are marshaling our resources. We do have a civic census count committee, but we're going to move beyond that. I think it's important to take this into some of the political tactics that have been used of really, you know, this is labor intensive, which is why we need money to be invested into it. You need the people to go knock on doors, not just once, not just twice, just like every single time of the day until we get that count out. And so a lot of what we're doing in Rhode Island, and we can do it a little bit more easily because we're more urban than maybe some of the jurisdictions here, is to focus on what have historically been seen as street politics type tactics. But we're going to use it in the census. And by the way, this is a great opportunity, and I want to speak to the foundations out there, to not look at just as, you know, this is a one-shot thing to help the organizations deal with the census. Because of the redistricting threat, that funding needs to continue or be more flexible to allow for communities to have a say in the redistricting process. That's the really big thing here. It's not just the census. It's the fact that how decisions get made will be by who's representing us. And those lines are critical to who's representing us. And I say this as somebody who, 20 years ago, thanks to Arturo's guidance and a number of other people, filed a redistricting lawsuit that led to the first Hispanic elected to the General Assembly.
Any of you have your questions ready and the microphone ready? Before we bring up Kevin De Leon, we have an opportunity to ask this wonderful panel for questions. We have one question right here, microphone. There we go. Can you say your name and
Sure.
where you're
My name is Antonio Martinez. I'm a board member of Somos, New York. And I want to ask the national organizations, because this is issue about immigration. There's 2 pieces to this that I think we all have to focus on. And this is about, I'm also an attorney, and I see this firsthand. I see how broken the legal immigration system is. And there needs to be an education and outreach explaining all the ways the current legal immigration system is broken, why people are being deported, why the whole thing is
Explain to who, I'm sorry.
explain to the public and to our people. Most people don't understand. So we have to get over this ignorance if we're going to change the system. Because when you understand, and if we talk about promoting the Constitution, and I always carry this with me, and I always strive to educate people to read this, to say this is the document. This allows me to visit you when I visited a detainee in a detention center, or I visit somebody in a jail.
Right.
This is the rules.
So what is your
My
question?
question
Which
is,
one of
what
our
are you
panelists?
going to be doing to do that and to educate the public and our community about what's wrong with the system, not us being at the affect of the system, but what's wrong with it. And then the second question is, how are we going to address what is a fair question that comes up in the immigration debate? Does the United States have borders? Do those borders need to be respected?
Of course.
And so this is, well, there's a perception that's being used against us that we're all for open borders, that we're all for this craziness. We need to be speaking to addressing the root causes of these problems that are driving the migration, as well as we have to fix the system. So what are your organizations going to do
Thanks
to
for the
address this?
question. Cindy, you want to start, right?
So I'll kick it off and say, when we look at immigration, let's remember that immigration is also about income inequality. And doing 58 town halls across this country and sitting down with individuals who consider us to be the illegals and the others, one thing that came across was this, that in their lifetime, they've seen stagnant wages and they haven't seen their quality of life improve over that of their parents. So we have to also have the strength to be able to sit down and have those conversations and try to understand what is happening with the individuals that see us as the other. I will tell you that for years now, LULAC has done Know Your Rights workshops in our communities. One perfect example that comes to mind is partnering with the churches, where we couldn't even publish the flyer because people were so scared that ICE was going to show up at the church to round them up and take them away. And I will tell you that being there and partnering with lawyers and doing the guardianship forms, and when you're asking the parent, who would you leave your child with if something happened to you? I cannot begin to tell you the number of people that would cry, and I would cry just along with them because of my hyper empathy. But for any parent in the room, or for anyone that has nieces and nephews, who would you leave your child with if you were rounded up? And so Know Your Rights is one component that we've been doing in terms of trying to be proactive. I would say the second part to what you're saying, Antonio, is that we for the longest time have been promoting a Marshall Plan. We sat down with the White House. Believe it or not, I know that was very, very disruptive. We got challenged, but we have sat with every single president since Kennedy, with the exception of Nixon, because we will not allow for others to speak for us. And what we're looking at is, how do we address the root issues? As someone that was born in Honduras, who was born in the city, San Pedro Sula, who has the highest murder rate per capita in the world, not to mention the highest femicide rate in the world, there are root causes that is driving this immigration situation to the borders of the United States. We are just seeing the symptoms. And so for us, it's also advocating for a policy that invests money to reconstruct and to make sure that the institutions in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and I would add Nicaragua and Venezuela, are being firmed and are strengthened so that we stop the garbage of people trying to migrate to the U.S.
I have the privilege of being part of the immigration team, as well as the civic engagement team at Unidos US, formerly National Council of La Raza, an organization who's had a role in every major piece of immigration legislation in our country for decades. I think that to do justice to the debate of immigration and a debate about civic engagement will be shortchanged no matter what. So the way that I would connect the two is to say that at Unidos, the response to how do we engage with community to try to combat misinformation and equip the community with the information that can help them be agents in the situation is the same way we go about civic engagement. It's a holistic approach. It's about doing that work. We do that work through people, through policies, and through programs. People, through our network of nearly 300 community-based organizations with whom we work to make sure that the community has the information they need, and to also not be part of unnecessarily scaring people even more by being a mouthpiece of whatever diarrhea of Twitter this president happens to have, which is designated to try to scare more than anything. But that's how. It's by advancing policies that are going to protect and defend the community, creating programs together with our community partners to create the on-ramps to that access, whether it is a person trying to navigate their status or becoming a voter, and through the programs that make those on-ramps real. As I mentioned before, among all of our organizations, we have plenty proof of concept on how these things get done and about the partnerships that are effective, the connection between the national level and the state and local levels. That is how we're going to advance on this issue. In this context, voting is a lever. It's not the only thing. But we see civic engagement as a continuum. It's about helping eligible immigrants become citizens, helping citizens become voters, and helping the community overall be engaged on the issue debates that affect them, whether that happens to be immigration, the economy, healthcare, education, and a lot more.
I know that the question was about the national organizations, but I just quickly want to step in and say that, and what better case study do we have than the case of Puerto Rico, and I say this as a Boricua, of how the lack of voting rights matters. Because the fact that we cannot vote in a federal system, and we've been a colony for 100 years, is part of the reason that we have the debacle that we have had. And so I encourage a broader conversation around not just immigration, but also the plight of Puerto Ricans, and the voting rights that they deserve to have.
Absolutely.
On the island.
We have time for one or two more questions. Right here in the front. And then the next one back there.
Hello, my name is Fabiola Montiel with First 5 LA. Thank you so much, panelists. Speaking about civic engagement and working towards democracy. At a national level, what programs are fit to include intergenerational programming that talks to children about civic engagement, about democracy? Because democracy must start in our houses. Thank you.
Yeah, do you mind? Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm glad you mentioned children, because when we talk about the census and we talk about the undercount of Latino children, we have to understand the components of that undercount. The largest segment of our community that is not counted in the census are our babies ages 0 to 4. And the irony is that the majority of Latino children and children overall missed in the census lived in households that returned the census form. So as far as the Census Bureau was concerned, everybody in that household was enumerated because they returned their form, check, go on to the next household that didn't return their form. So part of this civic engagement, civic participation, we gotta make sure we count all of our children. And there are adults who are making a conscious decision not to include every child who lives in their household on the census form for a variety of reasons. May not be related, maybe the nephew, the grandchild, foster child, but that's where it starts. It starts by making sure that we all count.
I would say, I'm so glad you asked that question. I felt like going, here, teacher, me. Yesterday at Unidos, we were hosting kids from schools in several states as part of a coding project. And some of them were doing coding in terms of services that immigrant families may be looking for. Another group of kids was doing a coding project on civic engagement. And these were 6th and 7th graders. And because it needs to start early, right? The other thing I would say, when I talk about proof of concept, right, I feel like Latino organizations, whether it's in the civic engagement space or other, are constantly represented by donors in the space as, well, you know, if only somebody knew how to do this work, right? And we have that in spades. Just at Unidos alone, right? We understand that a cookie cutter approach is not the only approach. That's one of the reasons we do community canvassing in some places. We do high school registration and service provider registration in other places, and why we are developing prototypes in the online space. Our goal is to make voter registration a rite of passage of high school graduation. And we know it's doable, and we know that particularly in this environment where youth are seeing what's at stake, particularly for their parents, the fire of advocacy and activism is being lit. And we need to make sure that we're connecting all the dots and empowering that leadership and join hands so that it's sustained.
I would add to that point, and I just learned this coming from Texas, that in Texas, there's a law that mandates that each high school registers their high school students. Here's the catch, it's not enforced. And so I think as leaders in this room, we need to think of a bigger and higher strategy of how do we create those laws and put them in place and make sure they're enforced so that our high school students are being registered in their voting. And here's another statistic. In 2020, 1 in 10 will be from Generation C, 18 a 23 años. Every 30 seconds, a Latino in the US is turning 18, right? So we have to make sure that we ourselves as advocates are also thinking, how do we have laws that mandate and that are being enforced so that our children are registering to vote?
And I'll give a perfect example of that. Automated voter registration. I had it passed in Rhode Island a couple of years ago. When you go to the DMV, and I would say, and my law actually allows for, and you go to any other government agency, we haven't implemented that piece yet, but you should be if we know that you're a citizen, we know what your age is, we know what your address is, why do you have to jump through 30 hoops to then print out a form to fill it out, to whatever? No, there should be automated voter registration. And then we're in this great experiment right now, and I would urge you all to figure out whether your state has it, and if not, to demand it. We have to make it easier for people to register and then to participate. The other piece that I want to talk about young people getting engaged is when you do elect people to office that actually are aligned, you can do really fun things like I offered all high schools in the state to run their student government elections on real ballots with real voting machines. That way, when people go to vote, they know what a ballot looks like, and they've seen the voting machine.
I would say, particularly given our audience and who's assembled here, I would say to our partners in philanthropy, make equity mean something. There's a lot of talk about equity these days, and I think that there's, you know, like statistics, there's been some creative ways to represent equity in a variety of sectors, sometimes including philanthropy. Let's lift up the power of our convictions. Let's disaggregate that data, right? What are your investments working in partnership with community organizations and initiatives that are for, by, and with the Latino community, not done unto us. Ya estamos grandecitos. We don't need to be experiments of other folks. We have the expertise to do that, and we can partner to do that. And I was hearing this morning that for an automaker to deliver, to conceptualize and deliver to market a car that is going to improve upon previous models, they need about 5 years in certainty. Let's take that model and work together on work that is not just about what needs and must be done for 2020, but about building for a future that will not only lift the Latino community, but frankly, it's going to help lift the social economic progress of the nation for everybody.
Thank you very much. On that note, Lisa, thank you so much. That's a powerful message to end this session with, and I want to thank Arturo and Madame Secretary. I'm sorry that I said that. Cindy, Larissa, thanks to all of you for participating. Very valuable. Thank you for your questions. And as we say goodbye, we welcome, of course, State Senator Kevin De Leon. Thank you so much. Take home the message and make the best of it. Thank you very much. Somebody left the phone? Ready? Okay, please welcome to the stage before you leave Senator Kevin De Leon. As you know, he has been very successful in California politically and also in moving forward the agenda for our Latino community. So thank you very much for being with us. I know you've been waiting the entire day. Bienvenido. You've been waiting a long time to be with us, so thank you very much for your patience and for being with us and for spending the whole afternoon with us. How do you feel more than anything else?
Bueno, me siento bien satisfecho, un poquito cansado más que nada, pero me siento bien honrado estar aquí con usted y con toda la gente, ¿no?
Why are you tired?
Por el vuelo del tecolote, the red-eye flight, you know, from the West Coast.
Oh, yeah.
El vuelo del
Since
tecolote.
now I live in the West, in the East Coast too, I kind of forgot about that tecolote. You know the tecolote? Yeah, the red eye. You know, we heard a lot about from the panelists today, visions for achieving greater political power in 2020 and beyond. Going back to 2018, you challenged power, of course, and the U.S. Senate race, running against a longtime U.S. Senator and incumbent. Tell us what you learned. Tell us what you learned about challenging power and why it is important to do that.
Well,
what challenges do we need to overcome?
Let me put this in context because I think it's really important. As just recently, the former leader of the California State Senate, and I think the first Latino in more than 133 years, let me put this in context. If you're the leader, if you're the president of the Senate, if you are the speaker of the assembly, if you're the lieutenant governor, you usually don't wake up in the morning and you say, I have a great idea. I'm going to challenge a 26-year incumbent with 95% name recognition, who's part of the Washington, D.C. Establishment Authority, who is a multimillionaire, along with her husband, a multi-billionaire, and think I'm going to win this race. It doesn't happen, you know. And I think the reason why I made the decision was based on values, challenging the Establishment Authority. One could argue that I'm part of the Establishment Authority, being, by definition, the president, the leader of the California State Senate. But when the comment was made by Senator Feinstein in San Francisco at the Commonwealth Club that perhaps if we were patient enough as Americans, that perhaps we could, President Trump could be a good president in the future. That violated my values of who I am, not as a leader of the Senate, not as a politician or policymaker, but as the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a third-grade education. And I think that's representative of all of us and who we are as individuals, regardless of where we come from and who we are. That's when I made the decision. I can say this, it was not easy. She spent $18 million, I spent $2 million. She had the endorsement of Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, understandably the Establishment Authority, but that was okay.
So what was the key?
The key thing was that if we had a couple more $1 million, I'd be in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. Senate floor right now. Because it was close. She ended up beating me, I think, by 6 points. You know, no one thought we would come that close. And we just needed a couple more $1 million to just get our message out. That was the only key thing, I believe. We tried to debate, but they didn't want to have debates. They didn't want to have a one-on-one with us. And you know, presumably, if you're the senior member of the Judiciary Committee, you bring so much weight and capacity that you should be able to you know, out-debate anybody. Yeah.
Will you do it again?
In a heartbeat, without question, yeah. In a heartbeat.
You don't give up.
No, that's who we are, Latinos. We don't give up. We're resilient.
Again.
Yeah.
This is something that I can relate with. You know, it's the 25th anniversary of 187. I'm sure most of you have heard of 187 in California. How does that experience in California in the mid-90s help us understand the national context for today, and how should we respond?
Well, I think they've always said, you know, that everything happens in California first. And that means not just the good, but it means the bad, and it also means the ugly. And Proposition 187 was born. That's where I cut my teeth politically, was on Prop 187, organizing march in what was then the largest march in the history of the state of California. The context is now, it's not statewide, but it's national in scope and nature, with an individual who occupies the most powerful political office in the world, which is being president of the United States. And you have an individual who has a very clear agenda, which is to divide the nation and to use immigrants. And I think Larissa had mentioned it. This is more about immigrants and undocumented immigrants, quote unquote legal and illegal. This is a proxy against Latinos and that emerging power. And the question is, when Latinos are in positions of power, whether you're in the Congress and state legislative bodies throughout the country, are you going to use that power with a sense of intentionality, in a sense of purpose, or you're going to be circumspect, overly cautious, because as a Latino, you're just happy the very fact that you've been elected to a position of power, but don't know how to use that power and how to exercise and leverage that power. Listen, when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, I was supposed to leave to Germany. It seems like an eternity. I was supposed to leave to Germany. I had a meeting with a bunch of ministers on the environment and climate change. I made the decision to stay. And we saw children. You saw children, 5 years old, 6 years old, who were crying out of fear, the miedo y la ansiedad, because of the new president. And even when Barack Obama, which was a historic election in 08, you didn't see children of Republicans cry. And I don't think I saw Democratic children cry because George W. Bush was elected president. This was something that was new for our nation, and I think that's why it required leadership.
So if California successfully pushed back on 187, what do we need to do as a community, as a Latino community, right now on a federal level, to push back?
Well, listen, I would like to...
It's not even one law or one bill. It's just a whole narrative. It's a debate that's taken over this country, a negative debate.
I think that power is challenged by Latinos at the state level. I'm a strong believer in subnational governments and the power of subnational governments, as opposed to what we tend to do is put all our eggs in one basket and believe that the Congress in itself is going to deliver for us, that they're going to be our leaders. And I realize that our leaders, we're the leaders. Everyone in this room is a leader. That's why 1 week after, 2 weeks, I should say, after the election in 2016, I made a decision. It was controversial, but I made a decision to hire the former Attorney General of the United States of America, Eric Holder, to be my general counsel of the California State Senate. An African-American man and a Latino man in my staff helped draft what is today the Sanctuary State Bill for California. And California is the largest sanctuary state state in the United States of America. But you have to speak truth to power and not just say, well, our leaders in Washington, D.C., our Democratic leaders, our Congressional Hispanic Caucus, they're the ones who are going to lead us through this battle. That's incorrect.
Staying on the same subject, as as the president of the California State Senate, you made climate change a policy, a big priority. Also, you lead on immigration policy, as well as making California a sanctuary state, like you just mentioned. Tell us about how equity may have guided your leadership in the Senate and even your work now.
Well, equity, I think, has always been my philosophy, because in other words, if I have $1 and I say, listen, I'm going to cut that in half, and I'm going to give Beverly Hills 50 cents, and I'm going to give Boyle Heights, 50 cents, and that's good, right? Because it's equal. It sounds right. We did the right thing, half and half. But we know that in reality, that continues to perpetuate, if you will, the systemic inequities that are born in this country. So you, as a policymaker, you in philanthropy, have to move policies or monies with intentionality and a sense of purpose to deal with the inequities, not inequalities. So to me, an equitable distribution of resources would be 80 cents for Boyle Heights, 20 cents for Beverly Hills. And that's why I moved it into policy. In California, we have the most far-reaching climate change policies, not in the United States of America, but in the entire world. And we have it etched in stone legally that communities that are disproportionately impacted by CO2, carbon dioxide emissions, as well as other criteria pollutants, NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, which is the smog, los contaminantes que nuestros hijos respiran sus pulmones día tras día, that we would have a distribution of not hundreds of millions, but billions of dollars that would go to low-income communities for electric vehicles, that go for low-income solar panels, energy efficiency. But you can't hope and want this to happen, because the free market forces are not going to allow it to happen unless you statutorily make it the law itself. So that's the big lesson. You have to make it law. If you don't make it law, people out of a good heart and their intentions are not going to say, well, I'll help the Latinos because it makes me feel good.
Right.
And I think the same thing goes, if I may say, for philanthropy, Hispanics in philanthropy. I'm going to be honest, I'm honored to be here. I've heard of Hispanics in philanthropy, but I've never met any Hispanics in philanthropy.
Well, here they are.
For the first time.
But you know, I know.
I've heard it's like a unicorn, you know?
I know that we've run out of time, but I don't want to let you go until I ask you this important question about HIP. Really, you know, part of HIP's mission is to strengthen Latino leadership, influence, and equity. What do you think it's going to take to achieve that mission? And what advice would you have for philanthropic leaders here on how to leverage philanthropy and advance this mission?
I'm a true believer in power and leadership is manifested in many different ways. It's not just political leadership, that somehow that political leadership will be the panacea to all our socioeconomic and political ills. I believe that those who are in positions of power and the money that you're sitting on and the ability to make decisions, to push those dollars out, to leverage those dollars, to improve the human condition for Latinos and many different policy matters up and down the country is really critical. I think that, this is my own personal opinion, I believe a lot of large funds, philanthropic funds, have been sitting on a lot of money and have not used it in a very judicious manner to move dollars to improve the human condition for Latinos and other people of color throughout the United States of America. You have to use this with intentionality and a sense of purpose. And one last thing I'd say is that, which I'm excited about, very excited about, next year in 2020, we're going to host HIP in California, in Los Angeles. So we're going to go to Los Angeles. We're going to have taco trucks, tacos de trepitas, cabeza, you know. We're going to have pupusas, elotes, you know, all that stuff is going to be. So HIP is, Ana Maria is bringing HIP, you know, to LA. So we're going to be really excited to welcome everyone to
Los
Los
Angeles.
Angeles.
That will be in June. So I know we're supposed to be saying goodbye now, but since I'm a news junkie and a political junkie, I have to ask you this question before we leave. The primary in California is moving up, right? Moving up to March.
We did it on purpose.
So what does that mean for Latino voters, and what should these candidates be doing to engage Latinos? You know, unfortunately, we've been taking the Latino vote for granted for way too long.
That is true.
That's got to change.
I think that by moving the primary up early in March, California is no longer an ATM machine where many of the presidential candidates will go in there, take money, and go into the battleground states, mostly in the Midwestern, whose values are very different. People talk about the heartland of America. I think the heartland of America is California, Texas, Arizona, you know, Illinois. It's all over the country. That's the narrative. And I think you have some wonderful panelists who talk about, you got to change this narrative, because people in power create that narrative. And they're also prone to revisionism and who we contribute. People don't know that LA County is the largest manufacturing base in all of America. We have this concept, it's Iowa, it's in Ohio, Michigan. No, it's in LA County. The vast majority of those workers are Latinos right there. So we shouldn't be asking for permission, number one, because I didn't ask for permission to run against Dianne Feinstein. I did it to represent all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for your attention. Thanks to HIP for inviting me and including me, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Please welcome back Hispanics in Philanthropy President and CEO, Ana Maria Arquilagos.
So, another round of applause for Kevin and Maria Elena. All of our speakers. All of you. Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing your ideas, your energy, your corazón to this HIP conference. It's evident, very evident, that we're working with corazón, sin miedo, and how do we start this? Unapologetically, right? So we're at the end of our time here, and the one thing that I want to make sure is that we don't go away with no action. We don't have the option of no action. You have to think about what the actions coming out of this will be. So what will be your action, and how will you, each and every one of you, leverage this moment? And let's also put our heads and our hearts together, because we have babies and we have a future generation. That's why we're here, and we have to be a catalyst for world change, for positive change for them. And so yes, next year, when we're in Los Angeles, the city of angels. We're going to have an opportunity to show the world what we got. And I call on every one of you to put every single dollar where our heart is. We face big challenges, and it's time for us to do what we do best, invest. Right? So thank you again, and let's welcome the beautiful and the very talented Maria Isa to the stage.
Hello, how's everybody doing? It's been a long session, hasn't it?
Yes.
Can I get you guys up and moving? Yes. Well, we're gonna check this out. DJ, let's get them started. I feel like I should be in the center for this one. They focus on the small picture. My world ain't got no time. Most of y'all wasted all mine. Stuck worshiping some fake shrine. I cheat on the wings of the butterfly. Stay balanced. Eyes, lips, hands, make transactions. Lost off the Adderall, they won't shut up. They had to fall like Cinderella. Added some salpimienta. Build with these box Jenga. Chocolate boulevard, tacos de lengua. I told the gringo walk, tend to lock off my mega high. Some yo, Mexican coyotes. Rock never owes me. Strong and hyenas. I'll pit in the beamer. Sip the Hennessy, Salinas, Heineken, act like Venus. Jukebox, Isa, got it all. I'm a mambo chupa all the pole. 'Cause I ain't going home with just anyone. I can't do a song with just anyone. I don't share a throne with just anyone. I am not a clone, I'm the only one. You see me on the cover, I'm a pretty one. Call me on the phone, I'm a busy one. I don't share a throne with just anyone. I'm a unicorn, I'm not just anyone. Anyone, no. Anyone, no. 'Cause we be down south like Elena, tropical clima, pagamento de esgrima, love to Carolina, Times Square máquina, all the Milton primas, merengando con amandones en la máquina, Boricua parade, Swift and Filet, Garcia Vegas, Cohibas all day, things getting played, linen PJs, el tambor, mi tambor, bomba, grenade, no gossip, no combo, no he say, she say, dame un despojo, no time for the hate, vete pa' allá, habla por semana y vete pa' allá. 'Cause I ain't going home with just anyone. I can't do a song with just anyone. I don't share a throne with just anyone. I am not alone, I'm the only one. You see me on the cover, I'm the pretty one. Call me on the phone, I'm the busy one. I ain't going home with just anyone. We some unicorns, I'm not just anyone. If all of y'all are some unicorns, and your individuality is what it makes you beautiful, let me hear y'all say, be hip.